On March 28, 1945, 3 days after the island of Iwo Jima was declared secure, Private First Class James McGuire from Bravo Company of the United States Army's 147th Infantry Regiment stood at the entrance to a collapsed tunnel near Hill 362A. He was equipped, as he would later recall, with guts, a flashlight, and a pistol. The Marines had left 2 weeks earlier. The battle was supposed to be over, but McGuire and his comrades were about to descend into a labyrinth that would reveal something the American planners had catastrophically underestimated. Not the Japanese will to fight. The Marines had learned that lesson in 36 days of the bloodiest combat the Pacific War had yet produced. What the Army cavemen, as they called themselves, discovered underground was something else entirely. The Japanese had built a fortress that modern military engineers still struggle to fully comprehend. 11 miles of tunnels had been completed before the battle began. But intelligence estimates suggested the Japanese had planned 27 miles. Most of that unfinished network remained hidden beneath volcanic rock and ash, sealed by American explosives, collapsed by bombardment, or simply never found. 80 years later, many of those tunnels remain exactly where they were left in March 1945. Sealed, unexplored, holding secrets that died with the 21,000 Japanese defenders who never surrendered. This is not a story about robots mapping tunnels, though that technology now exists and may one day reveal what lies beneath Iwo Jima's black sand. This is the story of why those tunnels were built, how they turned a 5-day operation into a 36-day nightmare, and why they remain one of the most sophisticated defensive systems ever constructed under combat conditions. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The engineering achievement begins with a single decision made by a man who understood Americans better than almost any officer in the Imperial Japanese Army. Lieutenant General Tadamaki Kurabayashi arrived on Iwo Jima on June 8, 1944. He was 53 years old, a descendant of samurai, and a cavalry officer who had spent years studying in the United States. From 1928 to 1930, Kurabayashi had lived with an American family in Buffalo, New York. He had studied at Harvard. He had traveled across the country. He had made friends with American officers at Fort Riley. He understood American industrial capacity in a way that few Japanese commanders did. When Kurabayashi examined the defensive positions on Iwo Jima, he found them arranged according to traditional Japanese doctrine. Artillery was positioned near the beaches. Pillboxes faced the likely landing zones. The entire defensive scheme was designed to destroy the invasion force as it came ashore. Kurabayashi ordered all of it changed. His predecessor, Lieutenant General Hideyoshi Obata, had followed the conventional wisdom that invaders must be stopped at the water's edge. Kurabayashi had seen what happened at Normandy. He had studied the American landings in the Marianas. He knew that beaches could not be held against overwhelming naval gunfire and air supremacy. The Americans would land. Nothing could prevent that. But Kurabayashi could make them bleed for every yard of volcanic ash between the beach and the island's northern cliffs. He pulled the artillery back from the beaches. He positioned guns in the interior where naval bombardment could not reach them. He ordered his engineers to dig. The island itself became his greatest advantage. Iwo Jima, whose name means Sulphur Island, was a volcanic formation 8 square miles in size. The southern end was dominated by Mount Suribachi, a 550-foot extinct volcano. The northern end rose to a series of rocky plateaus and hills, including Hill 362A and the Motoyama Plateau. Between these features lay the 2 completed airfields that made Iwo Jima strategically valuable. The volcanic rock was soft enough to cut with hand tools, yet strong enough to withstand bombardment once properly braced. Natural sulfur vents ran throughout the island, creating chambers filled with poisonous fumes and heat that reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. These conditions made construction agonizing. Work details could labor for only 5 minutes before being overcome by heat and sulfur. Workers wore gas masks. They drank water that tasted of minerals. They blasted rock in darkness, hauled debris through narrow passages, and braced ceilings that might collapse at any moment. Mining engineers arrived from Japan with blueprints for a defensive system unlike anything the Japanese military had attempted before. The plans called for tunnels at multiple levels to ensure ventilation and to prevent bombardment from sealing all entrances simultaneously. Chambers would be carved out to hold 300 to 400 men. Interconnecting passages would allow troops to move between positions without exposure to American fire. A main communications center would be constructed with a chamber 50 meters long and 20 meters wide, located deep enough to survive any shell or bomb the Americans could deliver. The grandest ambition was a single continuous tunnel linking all major defensive positions across the entire island. If completed, this passageway would have stretched 27 kilometers, connecting the elaborate installations in the northern hills with the defenses carved into Mount Suribachi. 25% of the garrison, approximately 5,000 men, were detailed to tunneling duty. They worked through the summer and fall of 1944. By the time the Marines landed on February 19, 1945, they had completed 18 kilometers, 11 miles. But those 11 miles were enough. Kuribayashi established his command post in the northern part of the island, about 500 meters northeast of Kita village. The installation sat 20 meters underground, consisting of caves connected by 150 meters of tunnels. The general's war room was one of 3 small concrete enclosed chambers. The concrete walls and ceilings were thick enough to withstand direct hits from naval artillery. South of Kuribayashi's command post, on Hill 382, Japanese engineers built a radio and weather station. Nearby, Colonel Chosaku Kaido, who commanded all artillery on Iwo Jima, had his headquarters in an enormously large blockhouse. Other hills in the northern portion of the island were tunneled out with multiple entrances and exits. These installations were virtually invulnerable to damage from artillery or aerial bombardment. Mount Suribachi alone harbored several thousand yards of tunnels. The northern slope was honeycombed with artillery positions, machine gun nests, and troop shelters. Steel doors protected gun emplacements. Crews could roll the doors open, fire, and close them again before American spotters could call for counterfire. The system was elegant in its brutality. Marines clearing bunkers on the surface would move past positions they believed secured, only to take fire from Japanese troops who had moved through the tunnels to reoccupy the same bunkers from below. The construction took a toll that statistics cannot adequately capture. Work details were relieved after 5 minutes in the worst tunnels. Men collapsed from heat exhaustion. Sulfur fumes burned lungs and eyes. American air attacks became a daily occurrence from December 8, 1944, forcing workers to divert time to repairing damaged airfields. Supply ships were sunk by American submarines before they could deliver materials. Yet the work continued. By February 19, 1945, the Americans had been bombing Iwo Jima for 74 days. It was the longest and most intense preliminary bombardment in the Pacific theater. Naval artillery had poured shells onto the island. Aircraft had dropped thousands of tons of bombs. American planners believed they had devastated the Japanese defenses. Admiral Chester Nimitz, according to some accounts, suggested the Japanese might surrender without a fight. The intelligence was catastrophically wrong. American reconnaissance had identified surface installations with impressive detail. Maps distributed to invasion forces showed 35 distinct types of defensive positions, from machine gun nests to heavy artillery. But the maps could not show what lay beneath the surface. The tunnel system was invisible to aerial photography. The true extent of Japanese preparations remained unknown. Major General Harry Schmidt, commander of the Marine Landing Force, requested a 10-day bombardment immediately before the assault. Rear Admiral William Blandy, commanding the Amphibious Support Force, refused. He insisted on 3 days, arguing he needed time to replenish ammunition before supporting the landing itself. Schmidt asked for 9 days. Blandy refused again. The bombardment would be 3 days, and weather impaired even that limited shelling. The Marines landed at 900 hours on February 19th. The first waves came ashore on beaches made of steep dunes of soft, gray volcanic ash. Men sank to their ankles. Vehicles floundered, unable to gain traction. Landing craft piled up in the surf. Equipment jammed on the steep beach face. The Marines struggled forward, inland from the water, establishing a beachhead in eerie silence. General Kurabayashi had ordered his men to hold fire. Let the Americans land. Let them bring their vehicles and supplies onto the beach. Let them concentrate in the killing zones that Japanese artillery had been pre-sighted to cover. For just over an hour, the Marines advanced with minimal resistance. Some began to believe the bombardment had worked. Then Kurabayashi gave the order. Everything from machine guns and mortars to heavy artillery began to rain down on the crowded beach. The volcanic sand erupted in explosions. Marines dove for cover that did not exist. Vehicles burst into flame. The carefully planned landing became chaos. From Mount Suribachi, hidden Japanese guns opened their steel doors, fired, and closed again. American naval gunners could not identify the source of the fire quickly enough to suppress it. From the northern hills, artillery that was supposed to have been destroyed poured shells onto the beach. The Japanese were not supposed to be there. The bombardment was supposed to have killed them, but they had been underground, waiting. By nightfall on D-Day, American casualties exceeded 2,400 men. The Marines had seized a portion of one airfield, establishing a foothold on the island, but at a cost that shocked commanders. This was supposed to be a 5-day operation. The Japanese were supposed to be demoralized and depleted. Instead, the Marines faced an enemy that appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating effectiveness, and disappeared back into the earth. The tunnel system allowed Japanese defenders to move between positions without being seen. A Marine squad might clear a pillbox, move forward, and take fire from the same position an hour later because Japanese troops had returned through underground passages. Artillery positions that appeared destroyed would resume firing after crews moved through tunnels to replace the dead. Snipers would appear in areas that had been secured, kill Americans, and vanish before retaliation could be organized. The fighting developed a rhythm unlike any other Pacific battle. Americans advanced during the day, taking ground at terrible cost. At night, Japanese troops moved through the tunnels to launch counterattacks, infiltrate American lines, and reoccupy positions. The Marines responded with artillery support and machine gun defensive positions. Hand-to-hand combat became common. The volcanic ash absorbed blood and cordite until the entire island seemed to reek of death. 4 days into the battle, on February 23rd, Marines from the 28th Regiment fought their way to the summit of Mount Suribachi. A small patrol raised an American flag at 10:20 hours. The image was captured on film, but Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson wanted a larger flag raised, one that men at the other end of the island could see. 6 men raised a second, larger flag that afternoon. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the moment. Marine Sergeant Bill Janost filmed beside him. Rosenthal's photograph became the most famous image of the Pacific War, eventually forming the basis for the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. But the flag on Suribachi did not end the battle. It marked the beginning of the worst phase. The northern part of Iwo Jima, where Kurabayashi had concentrated his defenses and his most elaborate tunnel systems, remained in Japanese hands. The fighting there would continue for 4 more weeks. The Marines pushed north across ground that offered no cover. Every ravine concealed Japanese positions. Every cave mouth could hide artillery. The volcanic rock made digging foxholes nearly impossible. Troops advanced across open ground under fire from enemies they could not see. Flamethrowers became essential tools for clearing bunkers. Demolition charges were used to seal cave entrances. Artillery and naval gunfire poured onto Japanese positions with an intensity that would have annihilated conventional defenses. The tunnels allowed the Japanese to survive bombardments that should have killed them. Hill 362A became one of the bloodiest objectives. The hill was honeycombed with tunnels and fortified positions. Japanese defenders had clear fields of fire down the slopes. Marines attacking uphill were exposed to interlocking machine gun fire, mortar barrage, and artillery. Progress was measured in yards. Casualties mounted with every assault. Units that had landed at full strength were reduced to skeleton crews. The 4th Marine Division suffered casualties approaching 75% in its infantry battalions. The Japanese, meanwhile, were running out of food, water, and ammunition. Kuribayashi's supply situation had been inadequate from the start. Troops had been provided 60% of the ammunition normally considered sufficient for a single engagement and food for no more than 4 months. American submarines had sunk many of the supply ships attempting to reach Iwo Jima during the defensive preparations. By late February, Japanese soldiers were fighting on diminishing rations. By March, some were starving. Yet they continued to fight. Kuribayashi had forbidden banzai charges at the start of the battle, recognizing them as wasteful of men's lives. Every soldier was ordered to kill 10 Americans before dying. The defense was to be methodical, calculated to inflict maximum casualties on the invaders. This discipline held for most of the battle, but as conditions deteriorated, desperation replaced calculation. On the night of March 25th, with the island declared nearly secure, approximately 300 Japanese soldiers launched a final banzai charge. They struck American positions with the ferocity of men who had nothing left to lose. More than 100 Americans were killed or wounded before the attack was broken. When morning came, the island was officially declared secured. But the declaration was premature. An estimated 3,000 Japanese troops remained underground, hiding in the tunnel system, refusing to surrender. They were starving, wounded, some had gone mad, but they were armed and determined to continue fighting. The Marines, who had suffered nearly 7,000 dead and more than 18,000 wounded, were withdrawn to prepare for the invasion of Okinawa. The task of clearing the remaining defenders fell to the United States Army's 147th Infantry Regiment. The soldiers of the 147th called themselves the Cavemen. They descended into tunnels armed with flashlights, pistols, and courage that bordered on recklessness. The tunnels were dark, dusty, and hot. Temperatures exceeded 120 degrees. Sulfur fumes choked the air. Japanese defenders waited in side passages and chambers, ready to kill anyone who entered. The cavemen developed tactics through trial and error. They used demolition charges to collapse entrances. They pumped gasoline into tunnels and ignited it. They called for artillery to seal positions that could not be entered safely. When they had to go in, they went in fast, shooting at anything that moved, trusting their instincts to keep them alive. From March 21st to June 30th, the 147th Infantry Regiment killed 1,602 Japanese soldiers and captured 867. In contrast, the regiment lost 15 dead and 144 wounded. The disparity in casualties reflects the advantage of firepower and the brutal efficiency of the cave-clearing operations. There is no way of knowing how many Japanese were sealed, burned, or buried alive inside the caves and tunnels. The total will never be known. Some Japanese soldiers held out for months. The last confirmed holdouts were machine gunners Matsuda Insoki and Yamakichi Kufuku, who surrendered on January 6, 1949, nearly 4 years after the battle ended. They had survived in the tunnels, emerging at night to scavenge supplies, living like ghosts in a labyrinth built for war. The tunnels that remain sealed today are time capsules. Explorers who have entered accessible sections in recent decades describe scenes frozen in time. Sake bottles line the walls. Grenades lie where they were dropped. Artillery shells rest in magazines. The bones of Japanese soldiers who never left their posts lie undisturbed in the darkness. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Battle of Iwo Jima produced statistics that still shock military historians. Of the approximately 70,000 Marines who participated in the assault, more than 26,000 became casualties. Nearly 7,000 were killed. The ratio of American to Japanese casualties was the worst of any major Pacific battle. For every square mile of Iwo Jima, more than 800 Americans died. The Japanese losses were even more catastrophic. Of the 21,000 defenders, only 216 were captured alive. Most had been wounded or knocked unconscious. The remainder fought until they were killed or died from starvation, dehydration, or wounds in the tunnels beneath the island. General Kuribayashi was never found. He is believed to have led a final night attack on March 26 and died in combat, but his body was never identified. His grave remains unknown. The strategic value of Iwo Jima became contentious almost immediately. Retired Chief of Naval Operations William Pratt questioned whether the island was worth the expenditure of manpower in April 1945, even before the battle for Okinawa had begun. The island was too small to serve as a major staging base. Its airfields could support emergency landings for damaged B-29s returning from raids on Japan, but whether those landings justified the casualties remained disputed. After the war, the Air Force claimed that 2,400 B-29 landings occurred at Iwo Jima, many under emergency conditions. Critics pointed out that more than 80% of those landings were for routine refueling, not emergencies. Of the aircraft that genuinely required emergency landings, air-sea rescue statistics suggested that 50% of crews who ditched at sea survived. The calculus of lives saved versus lives lost will never produce a clear answer. What is undeniable is the impact of Iwo Jima on American military planning. The casualties shocked commanders and the American public. The ferocity of Japanese resistance, the willingness to fight to the death, the effectiveness of the defensive tactics all pointed toward what an invasion of the Japanese home islands would cost. Casualty estimates for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, ran into the hundreds of thousands. Some projections exceeded 1 million American casualties. These estimates influenced President Harry Truman's decision to authorize the use of atomic weapons against Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Whether that decision was justified remains one of the most controversial questions in military history. But the shadow of Iwo Jima loomed over every discussion of how the war would end. The tunnels beneath Iwo Jima represent something more than military engineering. They represent a philosophy of resistance that accepted death as inevitable but sought to exact the highest possible price for victory. Kurabayashi understood he could not win. He told his wife in letters written before the battle that he was sorry to end his life fighting the United States, but that he wanted to defend the island as long as possible and delay American air raids on Tokyo. His letters reveal a man of contradictions. He wrote about military strategy and asked whether the family had repaired the gap in the kitchen floorboards, including diagrams for the work. He gave instructions for his burial, knowing his ashes would never reach home. He told his wife to live long and care for their children. He died as he expected to die, leading men who followed him into darkness. The tunnel system he ordered built achieved its purpose. It turned a battle that American planners estimated would last 5 days into 36 days of grinding horror. It cost the Marines more casualties than any battle in their history to that point. It demonstrated that Japanese defenders would fight with unprecedented determination when defending territory they considered part of the homeland. And then it was abandoned. The tunnels that could be safely collapsed were sealed. The entrances that could be found were marked and closed. The rest remained exactly where they were, hidden beneath volcanic ash and overgrown vegetation. The island today remains largely as it was left in 1945. The United States returned Iwo Jima to Japan on June 26, 1968, after 23 years of occupation. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force now maintains a naval air base on the island at Central Field. Approximately 350 military personnel are stationed there at any given time. They operate air traffic control, conduct meteorological observation, and maintain readiness for rescue operations. There are no permanent civilian residents on Iwo Jima. There is no source of potable water. The island is still volcanic, emitting sulfurous gases from vents that run throughout the terrain. Access is strictly controlled by the Japanese government. Veterans are occasionally granted permission to visit for memorial ceremonies. Former islanders, those who were forcibly evacuated in July 1944, have repeatedly requested permission to return. Most are now in their 80s or older. They remember Iwo Jima as a special place associated with memories both happy and sad. Their requests have been denied, officially because of ongoing volcanic activity and the military presence. The real reason may be simpler. The island is still a battlefield. Rusted equipment litters the beaches. Shell casings lie where they fell. Unexploded ordnance remains scattered across the landscape, buried in volcanic ash, hidden in collapsed tunnels. The risk of detonation makes exploration dangerous. The risk of cave-ins makes entering sealed tunnels potentially fatal. Many of the tunnels remain exactly as they were in March 1945. Some entrances were deliberately collapsed by American forces to seal Japanese defenders inside. Others collapsed naturally from bombardment or volcanic activity. A few remain accessible, though entering them requires special permission and carries significant risk. Those who have explored accessible sections describe an eerie preservation. The tunnels are time capsules where sake bottles still line walls, where grenades rest in ammunition stores, where the remains of Japanese soldiers lie undisturbed in the darkness. Modern technology could map these tunnels. Ground-penetrating radar exists that can detect underground voids. Robotic systems have been developed for exploring confined spaces in hazardous environments. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in the United States has funded programs specifically designed to map and survey underground environments. These technologies were developed partly in response to tunnel warfare in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the ongoing threat of North Korean tunnel systems beneath the demilitarized zone. But Iwo Jima's tunnels have not been systematically mapped with modern technology. The reasons are practical and political. Japan controls access to the island. The Self-Defense Force has limited interest in mapping tunnels built by an imperial army that no longer exists. The cost would be substantial. The benefit would be primarily historical. And there remains the question of what to do with any remains that might be found. The Japanese government continues to search for the remains of soldiers who died in World War II. Recovery teams have worked on islands across the Pacific, bringing home the bones of men who fell 8 decades ago. But Iwo Jima presents unique challenges. The tunnels that have not collapsed are unstable. The sulfur gas makes extended exploration dangerous. The unexploded ordnance makes any excavation potentially lethal. And the sheer scale of the tunnel system means that a comprehensive search would require years of work and resources that neither Japan nor the United States has been willing to commit. The legacy of Iwo Jima's tunnels extends far beyond the island itself. The battle influenced American military doctrine for decades. The lessons learned about defense in depth, about the effectiveness of underground fortifications, about the cost of assaulting prepared positions shaped planning for potential conflicts that never occurred. The tunnel system became a model for what American forces might face in an invasion of the Japanese home islands, a scenario that ended not with an amphibious assault but with atomic weapons dropped from aircraft that had staged through the very airfields the Marines died to capture. The tunnels also became a symbol. For Americans, they represented the fanaticism of an enemy willing to fight to the death rather than surrender. For Japanese, particularly in the post-war period when General Kuribayashi's letters were published and later, when Clint Eastwood's film brought his story to international audiences, the tunnels represented something more complex. They showed determination and courage, but also the futility of a war that Japan could not win, the tragedy of men sent to die in a fortress that could not be held. The soldiers who built those tunnels, who carved chambers from volcanic rock in heat that exceeded 120 degrees, who breathed sulfur gas and worked in darkness, did so knowing they would die there. Kuribayashi told them honestly that rescue would not come, that reinforcement was impossible, that their mission was to kill Americans and then to die. They accepted this. They dug deeper. They made the fortress stronger. And when the Marines came, they fought from those tunnels with a determination that cost both sides more casualties than any other battle in the Pacific War produced relative to the size of the objective. The question of whether Iwo Jima should have been taken remains contentious among historians. The island provided emergency landing fields for B-29 bombers. It removed a Japanese radar station that warned Tokyo of incoming raids. It gave American fighters a forward base from which to escort bombers over Japan. But whether these advantages justified 6,800 American deaths and more than 21,000 Japanese deaths for 8 square miles of volcanic ash is a calculation that defies easy answer. What is not disputed is the courage of the men who fought there. 27 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions on Iwo Jima, more than a quarter of all Medals of Honor awarded to Marines in World War II. The iconic photograph of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi became the most reproduced image of the war, eventually serving as the model for the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington. The battle entered American consciousness as a symbol of sacrifice and determination, a moment when ordinary men did extraordinary things under conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. For the Japanese defenders, no such recognition came until decades later. General Kurabayashi's letters to his wife and children, discovered after the war, revealed a man who understood the futility of his mission but carried it out with professionalism and humanity. He wrote poetry. He gave detailed instructions for home repairs. He told his family he was sorry to die fighting the United States, but that he hoped his death would delay the American advance and protect the Japanese homeland, even if only for a few more weeks. His body was never found. He lies somewhere beneath the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, perhaps in one of the sealed tunnels, perhaps buried in a collapse, perhaps in the open where decades of weather have scattered his remains beyond identification. The same is true for thousands of his men. They remain on the island, in the tunnels they built, in the fortress they defended. The tunnels beneath Iwo Jima will likely remain sealed for the foreseeable future. The technology to map them exists, but the will to deploy that technology does not. The island serves its current purpose as a military installation and occasional memorial site. Opening the tunnels would require resources, pose dangers, and raise questions about what to do with what might be found. And so they wait. 11 miles of completed tunnels, and miles more that were planned but never finished. Chambers that held hundreds of men. Passages that connected artillery positions and allowed defenders to move unseen beneath American fire. A command post where a general planned the defense of an island he knew could not be held. All of it preserved in darkness beneath volcanic rock, exactly as it was left when the last defenders died or surrendered. The tunnels are a monument to engineering skill applied to desperate purpose. They are a tomb for thousands of men who never left the island. They are a question that history has chosen not to answer, leaving the mapping of this underground fortress to some future generation that may find reason to descend into the darkness with lights and cameras and the technology to reveal what 8 decades have hidden. Until then, Iwo Jima keeps its secrets. The tunnels remain sealed. The fortress built by men who knew they would die there stands empty beneath the black volcanic sand, waiting. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.